Welcome to Windows on the World.
Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday 9 to
And what a great show we've got for you tonight. In fact, it's brimming with absolutely fascinating and wonderful facts. Joining the dots of the worst and best in propaganda from all angles, exposing the strategies and blatant lies from the useless and redundant media which parasites the life energy out of the public while keeping them confused and fearful. Yes, from Soros to yellow vests, to Parliament Square and on to the grubby manipulators who are hanging on the coattails of the global parasites. I wrote that earlier. I think that's quite good. All this and more, yes. But first I'd like to talk about the bigger picture. Our series of talks which we're taking around the country. And it could be in a town, city or village near you. Just get in touch through the website. We've had a few people contacting us this week. And we're going to be doing these shows all over the country. Yes, myself, Piers Corbyn and Sandy Adams. The bigger picture is what we cover. And our talks are available, so do go to Windows on the World and check out our archive and the info on our talks. Now, the next talk we're doing is the Angel Inn in Llandilo on the Saturday, the 13th of April, and it's 62 Rosmain Street, SA19 6EN. And it's just off the A40 near Carmarthen. It's going to be 12 a.m. till 6 p.m. Well, 12 p.m. actually, till 6 p.m. Pay £10 on the door for all day, and there's food available in the pub. You'll meet some very interesting people, and why not, as I said, organise one in your own area, because this is the sort of information which everybody needs to know now, and the public are actually getting very hungry for it. But before we kick off tonight's show, I've just got an article here from theorganicprepper.com. The reality of mind reading. Neuroscientists can predict your choices 11 seconds before you make them. That's interesting, isn't it? Now, of course, we have pre-crime recognition cameras, mood prediction, and of course facial, or as we call it, facial recognition, as it's 90% inaccurate, actually 97% inaccurate. But it appears, it says here, that we may have less control over our personal choices than we think. Unconscious brain activity seems to determine our choices well before we are even aware of them. This, of course, is known to the social engineers, and of course the use of telepathy seems to be a bit lost now. It's a bit of a lost art, is telepathy, as far as most of the majority of the population are concerned. But researchers at the Future Minds Lab at UNSW School of Psychology in Australia were able to predict basic choices participants made before they consciously declared their decisions. For the experiment, the researchers asked 14 participants to freely choose between two visual patterns, one of red horizontal stripes and one of green vertical stripes, before consciously imagining them while being observed in a functional magnetic resonance imaging machine. Now, a functional magnetic resonance imaging or functional MRI machine measures brain activity by detecting changes associated with blood flow. Now, this technique relies on the fact that cerebral blood flow and neuronal activation are coupled. When an area of the brain is in use, blood flow to that region also increases. Now, that's interesting because it's completely obvious what is going on in the heads of those we observe weekly on Windows on the World, as they're absolutely transparent in their lying, which is the central theme of tonight's show. So I hope you found that little diversion or sort of press at the start interesting. And it takes us on to this article. Yes, they were given a maximum of 20 seconds to choose between the patterns. Once they'd made a decision, they pressed a button and had 10 seconds to visualize the pattern as hard as they could. Next, they were asked, what did you imagine and how vivid was it? They answered these questions by pressing buttons. Now, it says here the results were unsettling. Scientists were able to predict which pattern people would choose before their thoughts even became conscious. Now, this is only part of a growing problem, the article says, with invasive technology. Just last month, a team of neuroengineers at Columbia University reported that they developed a system that can translate people's thoughts into intelligible, recognisable speech. Well, why don't they do that in Parliament? It'd be really handy, wouldn't it? That's Piers Corbyn laughing in the background. Slightly obvious joke there, but, well, you know, let's keep it kind of open and fun to start with, because we're going to go right into the rabbit hole tonight. And it says here, and on that note, Facebook is really into the idea of accessing user information directly from their brains. This is from an article that says Facebook wants to read users' minds. During a February interview with Harvard Law School professor Jonathan Zittrain, CEO of Facebook Mark Zuckerberg mentioned a brain-computer interface. It would look similar to a shower cap, it says here. The social media behemoth is researching this. Now, all this, of course, is one more reason to be unpredictable and not end up as an algorithm. And now onto the more well-known type of predictive programming agenda. We're going to talk really about, yes, politics and geopolitics, and in particular, to start with, we're going to talk about UK politics. Now, the infiltration of public interest events, or as they're also known, protests, is well documented by this show. Whether it's lobbyist funded, as in Tommy Fournames Robinson, Yaxley Lennon and his fake passports, who made an all-day appearance actually in the children's area at the Brexit gathering in Parliament Square. Or is it the undercover operatives stirring trouble dressed as yellow vests that we're going to be talking about? Yes, we're going to be talking about them in the UK. What about the paid-for protesters or undercover operatives shouting abuse at police outside Downing Street after the Brexit gathering? That's another thing we're going to be talking about. Now, this embarrassing Tommy Robinson spectacle, which invites the media to label everyone who voted to leave as far right, was on the opposite side of the Brexit gathering, which was last Friday. This is where most sensible voices, including Kate Hoey and Tim Martin of Wetherspoons, were, and made speeches along with Nigel Farage and others. Although reported on mainstream news on Friday night, the agent provocateurs didn't have much success at rousing the crowd to storm the barriers, as most of the Tommy supporters were shouting, "We want our country back" at Wetherspoons in Whitehall. It was quite interesting. Now, one plus point about living in a police state was that the socialist workers controlled opposition group were fenced in a long way from the get-together. This is the Brexit get-together in Parliament Square. And their puzzling use of the RMT flag was kind of apparent. They were waving an RMT flag along with their placards, which is very strange, as Steve Headley, Assistant General Secretary of the RMT, is actually against Remainers and wants to leave the EU. So that was all very strange, but quite an interesting day. Piers Corbyn was there. We met several people who'd actually listened to Windows on the World down at this gathering. I won't call it a protest because it was a gathering, really. All very well behaved. And as I said at the beginning of the show, basically we had the kind of adults group, which was in Parliament Square, and to the side of that, which we had to go past, was the Tommy Fournames kindergarten group, which were kind of getting more and more vocal and a little agitated, and the undercover operatives within the crowd were obviously going to try and wind them up, but that didn't work. And it was actually reported on Channel 4 News that there'd been a bit of a disturbance outside Downing Street. Well, we were there the whole time, and basically it was just a couple of agent provocateurs and a person carrying a coffin which said "Democracy is dead," which I think made it onto the front pages of a lot of newspapers. So now on to a very relevant story in the Daily Mail. It says freelance demonstrators protesting against Brexit were paid thousands of pounds by an organisation linked to Max Mosley. It says here the Fair Vote Project were hired to increase support for a second EU referendum. Now the group received a £25,000 donation. Freelance demonstrators protesting against Brexit were paid, it says in the article, thousands of pounds by an organisation linked to Max Mosley. As I said, the Fair Vote Project, it's called, were hired to increase support for a second EU referendum. The group received this £25,000 donation from an organisation called the Byline Festival, which ironically we were asked to attend last year but didn't. Now, Max Mosley, it says here, the former Formula One owner, is also accused of printing a racist leaflet, and he holds shares in this organisation. The story continues. Freelance demonstrators protesting against Brexit were paid thousands of pounds by an organisation linked to Max Mosley emerged yesterday. The campaigners from a group called the Fair Vote Project. I mean, this is great, isn't it? This is definitely the post-truth world. When we get the names of these things, they're always the opposite to actually what they say they are. The Fair Vote Project were hired to increase support for a second EU referendum during a protest in Parliament Square. The Byline Festival is run by Peter Jukes, who live tweeted throughout the Leveson inquiry into the press, and its project director is Kyle Taylor, who previously worked for pro-Remain group Best for Britain. It's all the wrong way around, this stuff, isn't it? That's just in my considered opinion, by the way. But it says here, the Fair Vote Project says it is committed to publishing whistleblower evidence connected to possible cheating in the referendum. It campaigns for a second poll. It was founded by a consultant who worked for the anti-Brexit group Best for Britain, that was set up by prominent Remain campaigner Gina Miller and part funded by George Soros. Who else? The group is reported to have hired up to 30 people to target thousands travelling to work to convince them of the need for a second referendum. The teams, armed with megaphones and placards, handed out leaflets in Leeds, Manchester, Birmingham and London. They urged people to join a protest in Parliament Square to call for a second and fair vote. Well, so the first vote clearly wasn't fair. But the people who were there last Friday would probably disagree. Oh, is this what democracy looks like? This, of course, is the tip of the iceberg as far as subversive groups go. But the anti-Semitic George Soros and his hundreds of subversion groups are embedded into every fake protest going on. After he took over Occupy, there was no stopping the template for these fake protest groups. Now, could the likes of Extinction Rebellion exist without the fake groups which preceded them, with their puppet leaders, soundbite rhetoric and controlled general assemblies using the Rand Corporation crowd and opinion control mechanism known as Delphi technique? And if you don't know what I'm talking about here, look at our films, The Puppet Masters of Occupy and The Puppet Masters of Occupy Revisited. This is where we first came into contact with Delphi technique, general assemblies, and basically this command structure that's put in place in all of these fake opposition controlled groups, such as Extinction Rebellion, who in actual fact are a controlled opposition group. They're a controlled opposition group in the respect that they don't even have a proper manifesto. They stand for corporate interests and corporate interests only. But it carries on here. The European Council on Foreign Relations contains a who's who list of subversives, including Alexander Soros and the UK disgraced change agent Brendan Cox, who is now subverting public opinion below the radar. He's also on the European Council for Foreign Relations. Now, it says here, one of the Fair Vote Project's recent posts states, Hillary Clinton joins Damian Collins and Tom Watson in calling for the public inquiry into the EU referendum that Fair Vote UK is fighting to make a reality. Now, the hypocrisy of the extreme far left and the Gina Miller regime, backed by subversives and Uncle Soros, is audacious. That is the strategy of the extremists, who act as totalitarians and will stretch the truth to fit their agenda at every opportunity. Now, having the backing of Hillary Clinton and advertising it shows how blatant these lot are. They state, Fair Vote UK are pursuing a judicial review claim for a public inquiry into campaign against the outrageous attempt by Mail on Sunday to smear Ken Livingstone. Oh, hang on, this is the next story. I think I'm so used to these kind of That's right. Yes, sorry. Piers has just walked in, and Piers Corbyn is here, so I'm going to give him a microphone. But yes, sorry, I've just overrun onto that section. Now, if you put this microphone on,
okay,
we should be ready to go. But as way of an opener, I think that was actually quite interesting, because it sort of paves the whole way here for what the show's going to be about, and the way that things are subverted, not only by undercover operatives, but basically by these change agent groups. So as a way of getting into the show, Piers, you were there at the Brexit gathering on Friday, and you observed what went on. So give us your take on it.
Well, it was great fun being there, actually. A lot of really genuine people, you know, from the Midlands and the North, some of whom recognised that my accent was partly flavoured by having lived in the Midlands, which I thought was very perceptive of them. Yeah, I would say, though, just as a word to start, that this is the most important fortnight in British politics this century, or quite likely since the war. A lot of things are going to happen this week, and it seems to me that the ruling circles are possibly not quite sure what to do. Anyway, just to go through some of the things you mentioned the Socialist Workers' Party. Now, you seem to be confused by them, but the Socialist Workers' Party, the SWP, is fully behind leaving. They're very strong Brexiters, or Lexiters, left exit.
Well, this is what I've been led to believe,
They are, yeah. So that's why they were waving RMT, because RMT are exit as well, are they?
But they were surrounded by people with Remain placards.
Were they? Ah.
Yes.
Perhaps they'd been hemmed in by them.
Have the infiltrators been infiltrated? Or have the infiltrators
I don't know. Oh, I see.
themselves?
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the police had decided to put the Tommy Robinson crew in one part of Whitehall and the SWP in another, and the sort of main demonstration was allowed onto Parliament Square. So there was no aggro from either of those two sections. But I don't think the SWP would have been any aggro, although there would have been aggro between the SWP and Tommy Robinson.
There were people there with socialist worker placards.
Yes.
And there was an RMT flag present.
Okay.
That's just what we saw when we walked
difficult
past.
to read much into that then. I think your comments about Max Mosley and Soros and so forth, and the so-called Fair Vote project, which is clearly the opposite to what it claims to be, are interesting. Because you mentioned that Mosley was been accused of some racist
Yes,
propaganda.
this was a while ago, and I can't remember the exact details of it.
No, indeed, it was. But that is interesting because, of course, the main thing the powers that be are doing now is trying to smear the Brexiters as being some sort of racist or something.
We've covered this before, haven't we? This has been really prominent, and this is why I thought that we'd take this show a step further.
We will, but we should mention about Jon Snow this week.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I was going to, but I found it quite trivial compared to the other stuff that we've got into in tonight's show. But in a way, it's not trivial, but it's quite an interesting point, yes.
Okay, yeah. Because Channel 4 is systematically trying to smear Brexit supporters. And he made the comment that there weren't many black peoples or whatever, ethnic
minorities. Well, what he actually said was he'd never seen so many white people in one place.
Well, yes. So it was... Well, I don't think I find that hard to believe, but I definitely saw some black people on the demonstration, and I know a lot of black people who voted Leave. But the fact that the United Kingdom is 87% white people would obviously be reflected in the crowd there, which was going to be vast majority is going to be white people.
Very unfortunate statement for him to make, actually.
I mean, but it shows what they're trying to do, you see, because the Remain campaign do not have a single argument in favour of Remain in terms of the interests of the people or the economy. So instead, they launch into smear tactics and labels. Like, if you vote with them, you're voting with bad people who are racist or whatever. Now,
basic and redundant propaganda, in my
that's
opinion.
Right, absolutely. And I think more and more these 2 weeks we'll see that Remain have nothing to say. You see, they mouth things like jobs. We want jobs. Okay, well, but look at the history of the European Union. That has been a history of dismantling of British industry by various mechanisms of the European Union. In particular, the European Union Emissions Trading Scheme, which plays around with carbon credits to close down industry, which we could go into the details of that if you want. But in practical terms, the EU means deindustrialisation. And, of course, the reason why we don't get the truth out of the most of the political parties most of the time is because of the way the European Union works. The European Union is a setup for corporate international capital to exploit, remove, plunder what it can from the European Union, but in particular the countries in the European Union, especially Britain in particular, move industries out of Britain into the third world or India or whatever, where they can make greater profits and make sure that we pay for the movement of these operations, and therefore increase the profits of the multinationals. Right. Well, having said all that, what we have is a parliament which is trying to defy what it promised it would do. The actual facts of the referendum are that 63% of constituencies voted to leave, and the rest will remain. However, in Parliament, the MPs are sort of juxtaposed in the opposite direction. Namely, the majority of MPs, quite about 2/3 I would say, are actually opposed to Brexit and are refusing to carry out the wishes, or pretending to carry out the wishes of the people, by putting forward this fake Brexit from Theresa May, which was made in Germany. A Brino, a Brexit in name only. Now, there's a number of things going on. One is that there may be legal challenges, there will be legal challenges to the Parliament's decisions on Monday, where, because Parliament agreed in an Act of Parliament that we are leaving on the 29th of March, in the minds of lawyers, we have now left. And the extension for 2 weeks or any number of weeks is illegal, because the wrong process was gone through in order to do that, even if there is a process available to do it. There certainly hasn't been a legal process, that is the point. Now, if you look at the arguments for and against what should happen next, it's crystal clear to anybody that leaving now without a deal, i.e. not a formal deal with the European Union, would be by far the most powerful way of getting the European Union to agree things that Britain needs. The reason being that the European Union exports more things to Britain than Britain exports to the European Union. So the Germans are desperate to sell cars to us, and they will come to some arrangement for it. Now, that needs to be some sort of trade arrangement. I think calling it a customs union maybe it leads to confusion, because people have voted specifically against a customs union, which is part of the European Union. But it could be what you might call a customs union. But nevertheless, whatever comes out would be easier to get once Britain has actually exited properly and not been controlled by the EU. And on the media, we've had interesting things happening. Piers Morgan, who says, and I'm sure he did, voted to remain. But he now says he will, if there was a second referendum, he would vote leave as a protest against the anti-democratic behaviour of Parliament. And he's put out a tweet about that, which has had 10,000 retweets in just a few days, which is really very interesting. Now, it might be that the powers that be are coming to the point of view they're going to have to give up, because you see, they talk about a second referendum, but I do not believe they actually want a second referendum. What they want is a Brino, a Brexit in name only, because if they have a second referendum, it would make trouble for a long time, the course of the referendum, and I would say it's 99% certain that Remain would lose big time. I mean, historically, anyone who's called a revote on anything always loses in constituency elections. That's always been the case. And in this case, people are so pissed off with the way Parliament has operated and the European Union's operated that people that follow Piers Morgan's example will vote leave if it happens. So I think it's all game playing that they're going on with. But I would urge you, if you're listening, anyone listening now, to ask a Remainer that they know why they want to stay in the European Union. Now, I think it's very unlikely they'll come up with a concrete answer. Often they say things like it was a close result. Well, it wasn't that close. It's equivalent to 1,200 majority in an average constituency. But so what? I mean, completely, absolutely, so what? The result is a result. And then they say jobs. Well, but the history of the European Union is the desecration of jobs in British industry. I mean, I can't see a positive reason. They say we want to be friendly and happy-clappy with Europe. Well, you can still be friendly and happy-clappy with people, just the same. I mean, you could still travel to Europe just the same.
Well, we're still going to be part of Europe in a physical sense, and we always have been. So that's really as far as we have to take that, I think, because these people haven't got an argument. As you say, they come up with very childish things. And even if it meant getting a visa, it takes 5 minutes when you get there. So let's move on. I was getting slightly confused there because we were talking about this despicable Fair Vote project, the 1984 world of Gina Miller and the subversives. And I moved on swiftly to an organisation called Fair Vote UK, which are totally different. And that's why I kind of I interjected there and brought you in, because we need to separate this. Now, Fair Vote UK says here, are pursuing a judicial review claim for a public inquiry into the complaint against the outrageous attempt by the Mail on Sunday to smear Ken Livingstone. Glenn Owen, political editor of this Mail on Sunday, has watched the video, it says here, of our excellent meeting, Defend the Left, and still manages to utterly and dishonestly misquote Ken Livingstone. Even in the headline, he charges Ken with having said, "It is not anti-Semitic to hate the Jews of Israel," which of course is not what he said. But clearly Ken only listed this as one of the ridiculous charges made against him. So isn't this an interesting thing? So basically, you quote something. It's a bit like, I suppose it's a bit like that Goebbels quote in a way about propaganda. People attribute it to him as though he was talking about his propaganda. Now, you see what I mean? That this is... So
that's what he's been accused of.
Yeah, exactly. So but basically,
it's not true. I mean,
so basically, he
Ken
quotes.
Talk like that.
You quote the outrageous statement that's been made against you, and they quote it as though you've said it. This really is the post-truth world. Anyway,
no smoke without fire.
It says here, Jeremy Corbyn's office did not want it to happen. It was about distracting. This is endemic if you are a genuine socialist leader who's going to transform things for ordinary people and make the bloody corporations pay their fair share of tax. They will do whatever is necessary to stop you, and that means lies and smears in most of the West. In other parts of the world, it can mean assassination. Pretty sensible kind of comment, that, I think. Yeah. The former mayor of London continued, "It's not anti-Semitic to hate the Jews of Israel, and you can't have a proper functioning democracy in a world in which the media, whether it's the press or internet, can spread lie after lie after lie. This is gutter journalism," it says here, "of the worst kind. Here is what Ken Livingstone actually said at our meeting." Here's what Ken Livingstone actually said. "He," meaning John Mann, "starts shouting in my face that I'm a Nazi apologist. He then goes on television and says that I said Hitler was a Zionist. How can a man who loathes Jews be a Zionist? But because it was all filmed on telly, it went global. And it wasn't just that. Soon you would see all over the internet that I said Jews are like Nazis, and it's not anti-Semitic to hate the Jews of Israel. You can't have a proper functioning democracy in a world in which the media can spread lie after lie after lie." That's actually what he said. He was reporting what John Mann had accused him of, and he ridiculed these charges because they were so absurd. And the publisher of the Daily Mail and Mail on Sunday, it says here, must immediately take down this article and apologise to Ken Livingstone for misquoting him, clearly in the hope of kicking off once again a scandal that in reality is just not there. Well, it doesn't matter whether the scandal's not there, does it? Because they do this every day of the week. We did bring this up last week, that your brother has been attacked probably more than anyone else in this regard. But the thing is about this fake news and the whole of the way that it's being implemented over and over and over and over again. It's extremely tedious. This article goes on anyway, but have you got any comments on that before we move on?
Well, yes. Obviously the powers that be are doing everything they can to undermine Jeremy's support in the Labour Party, and Ken Livingstone, of course, although he does say things in an unwise manner at times, I suppose, is not in any way a racist. You know, that is a completely ridiculous thing. Just like accusing Jeremy of being a racist. I mean, that's the last thing either of them are. I think these type of attacks on supporters of the project to get a fairer distribution of wealth in Britain via the Labour Party will carry on. And, the crucial thing about Brexit, of course, related to it, is that the powers that be do not want Brexit because they want to prevent the policies that Jeremy puts forward. And of course the European Union would make it very difficult to nationalise anything, even the railways. I would just say about Brexit that I think everyone listening ought to do everything they can to talk to Remainers, convince them that they're being misguided and misled, and also contact MPs and say on no account whatsoever vote for Theresa May's German Brexit. It is a trap. And what we must do is leave without a deal, or in fact, in practical terms, it's with partial deals already worked out and preparations already made to deal with any situation that may arise, because both the European Union and the British government have made preparations for anything which might happen after Brexit, which I think is probably almost nothing, be a Y2K moment. But you see, there are in fact partial things in place, or a lot of things in place. So we're not even leaving as a no deal, we're leaving with it's a managed exit to the World Trade Organization. In fact, which would be excellent, and we should go for it all the way.
Yes. Did you see that email that was sent to us by that chap we met at the Brexit get-together on Friday?
No.
Well, it's very interesting, and we'll probably get him on. But basically, It was about the World Trade Organization article, or Section 24, which really applies to the whole of this situation of leaving, and how the whole thing has been manipulated, basically taken advantage of the public's gullibility and lack of information on what they're actually dealing with here. And we're going to probably go into that in the next few weeks, because it's a really interesting thing. And that also tied in to the conversation we had with the same chap about how these movements are infiltrated and how basically the narrative is controlled at every level, which brings us on to the next part of the show. Press TV put a video up. It said French cops wearing yellow vests to infiltrate the movement. The French government's tactics in dealing with the yellow vest protest movement continue to spark major controversy. The latest outcry is over undercover French police posing as yellow vest demonstrators. Who would have thought? Which many say undermines France's democracy. Well, it does.
They're threatening to use live ammunition against things.
Well, that undermines it a little bit more, doesn't it? But I think
this is what Remainers are wanting.
Yes, of course.
I mean, come on, this is reality in France now. And people are prancing around saying, let's join them. And come on, the Yellow Vests don't want us to join, they want us to leave. The Yellow Vests support Frexit, French exit, who were present on the demo. And we met them.
Yes.
Excellent people, amazing people. But we can have solidarity between peoples without being in the prison of the European Union, which prevents this sort of solidarity.
Absolutely true. I mean, the thing is that once you start looking into all of this stuff, you find that it's there at every level. And it's interesting that sometimes this agent provocateur stuff just doesn't work. It kind of backfires, like it did in Whitehall. There was a couple of agent provocateurs there trying to say, we want our country back, as if they're going to storm Downing Street when there's a Wetherspoons down the road.
Bad idea, yeah.
I know.
Well, it's somewhat well defended, Downing Street, one has to say.
Well, it rather was, but it was quite amusing, actually, because as we were walking away from it, there about 50 coppers in the yellow vests, basically, they ran past us to get to defend these gates at Downing Street, which nobody could get through anyway. But I suppose it looks like they're all there,
Proper wrought iron, really tough stuff, Victorian excellence.
Yes, absolutely. And
But of course, if you were Extinction Rebellion, you would have been allowed to lie on the road.
well, we saw Extinction Rebellion lying on the road there, didn't we?
We did. Why don't the Remainers adopt that tactic? Eh?
Well, exactly. Why don't the extreme far right and the extreme far left do the same thing? Just lie in the road, yeah. This is from Zero Hedge, the Southern Poverty Law
excellent
Centre.
stuff.
Now, the Southern Poverty Law Centre, which is basically this funded organisation which is funded by the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League in America, and is basically a kind of a part of that. It says the Southern Poverty Law Centre, but they're involved in all sorts of subversion and they're nothing to do with poverty or law. It says the Southern Poverty Law Centre implodes. President and legal director resign amid sexual misconduct scandal. Now, why is it these subversives get caught up in all this stuff? I wonder why that is. The Southern Poverty Law Centre, the vicious left-wing attack dog used by the likes of Facebook, Twitter, Google and Amazon to identify at-home hate groups, is unravelling, it says here. As it turns out,
call it left wing though. That is ridiculous, isn't it?
well, exactly. But the point is, what I suppose they like to use the term extreme right, so we should use the term extreme left when dealing with them because it balances things out, you know. I mean, this is what it's about, isn't it? It's about creating a synthesis, the middle way, which is totalitarianism.
Well, they're all false narratives to undermine accountability.
Exactly. It says here, as it turns out, the SPLC is a cynical money-making scheme, according to a former staffer's blistering tell-all published this week in the New Yorker. The centre's chief goal is to bilk naive and wealthy donors who believe it's an earnest effort to combat bigotry. Now, I can't believe that all of the people who fund it actually think that. I mean, some of them must be thinking like old Uncle George Soros, mustn't they? They must be. It doesn't make any sense otherwise. It says here, outside of work, recalls Bob Moser of his days working for the organisation, we spent a lot of time drinking and dishing in Montgomery bars and restaurants about the hyperbolic fundraising appeals and the fact that though the centre claimed to be effective in fighting extremism, hate always continued to be on the rise, more dangerous than ever, with each year's report on hate groups. The SPLC making hate pay, we'd say.
Get funding to fight it, don't they?
That's right, it says here, the SPLC making hate pay, we'd say. It was hard for many of us not to feel like we'd become pawns in what was, in many respects, a highly profitable scam. So even employees of these propaganda hate organisations are appalled at the agenda going on. Now, wouldn't it be great if there was some defectors from the UK version of the SPLC, Hope Not Hate? I mean, does anyone with any critical thinking actually join Hope Not Hate? Well, so far there's no evidence of that whatsoever. But maybe in the future somebody might infiltrate Hope Not Hate, or maybe an employee might actually go against them, because we've actually been attacked. Well, associates of us and us as well at Windows on the World have been attacked by this group, this kind of charity. It's a charity as well as a limited company. And in other words, what we need is a bit of impartiality. We need some impartiality going on here, and we don't seem to get it. It says here, the next article is How to Identify a Globalist Criminal by Brandon Smith. He says, probably the most overwhelming epiphany I have come to in my 12 years of analysis into globalism and the nature of evil is that globalists are in fact tied together by a root mental illness or psychological aberration. This occurred during my research on narcissistic sociopathy, or what some circles might call psychopathy. Style open borders globalism. So psychopathy, style open borders globalism, he calls it. When you scratch the surface, the UN was charged with an agenda defined by Rothschild people, and so was Zionist nationalism and Israel itself. So the whole thing boils down a question of headquarters for the global regime, New York or Jerusalem. Now, this is a really interesting point he's brought up here. New York, he says, is the old HQ. Jerusalem is the new HQ. Which of the two will prevail is pretty obvious. That's how easy it is to predict the outcome of this global-scale dialectical game. They will let you be a nationalist, but only if you submit to the Zionist nationalist program. All true nationalism is to be wiped out, and that's the strategy. Now, Per in Sweden sent this, and I find it's a really interesting article. He says, this article makes great reading, but it's a dialectical game where the new Zionist nationalism or pro-Israel right Netanyahuism, Likud, is pitted against the UN and Bilderberg. Now this has been happening recently with the right-wing Israeli extremists going up against the UN. Ultimately, they will work it out between them behind locked doors. That's my opinion. Yeah. But they may argue in public, but that's about it. So, I mean, it's a really interesting kind of take on things, this. But this has all been playing itself out and makes sense. And there's even preparation for a third temple in Jerusalem. Now, we reported that some industrious Jerusalemites have been constructing an altar out of breeze blocks. This was in the news a while ago, right? So that's just a kind of
I thought they
surreal.
should be done out of granite.
I know, but they made some out of breeze blocks apparently. It was a serious story though a while ago because they were trying to get it ready in a hurry, you see, to get the third temple ready in a hurry. But of course, Trump has been remarkably cooperative in this scheme. Now, so let's get on to propaganda, day-to-day propaganda. LGBT education lessons will be taught in primary schools following historic vote by MPs. This was in the Daily Mail. The government's new LGBT inclusive regulations for relationships and sex education, or RSE, were approved by 538 votes to 21. After Education Secretary Damien Hines announced the proposed update last month. Now, that's a huge majority there, isn't it?
Yeah. Well,
what do you think
if they
about
knew
that?
what they were voting for. Well, I don't know. It's a kind of knee-jerk reaction, isn't it? There's a headline LGBT, and they think we've got to vote for this. What it means in practice, they may not know. But there was that very interesting protest recently where the vast majority of parents in the school just took all the children out. Yes,
I think they were majority Muslims as well. I think it was in Birmingham.
Indeed. But I think all faiths were involved in opposing it because of course, there's things in this LGBT movement, if you like, not movement, but rules, suggestions, which seem to defy numbers of religions, not just Islam.
Well, it's social engineering to actually destroy the minds of children because children...
They defy what's said in the Old Testament. Now, you can believe it or not, accept or not the Old Testament, but you see there is certainly a conflict between the LGBT aims and the literal wordings of the Old Testament.
Exactly. But it says here, pending approval by the House of Lords from September 2020, all secondary schools will be required to teach pupils about sexual orientation and gender identity, and all primary schools to teach about different families, including those with LGBT parents. Now, why are they teaching that in a primary school? Yeah. I mean, that's clearly, obviously, an agenda. And these idiots that vote for it and these parents that go along for it do not understand what the agenda is, otherwise they wouldn't do it. Because children in primary school, I mean, why do they need to know about this? It's absolutely confusing and it destroys the mind. Because if you teach that to people before 7 or kids before the age of 7, in my opinion, then you're going to get them incredibly mixed up. And this is what social engineering is all about. Get them all dependent on the state, make them absolutely mentally incompetent with all of this agenda. That's my opinion. That's what it does. That's what I see happening. I mean, what do you think about it?
Well, I think there could be a lot in what you say, because you take this recent school strike for climate, or schools, whatever it's called. School strike for climate, that's what it's called. The stuff that's come out of that, I mean, obviously, largely it's sort of put in there by certain adults manipulating these pupils, but the level of stupidity and ignorance coming out is absolutely astounding. I mean, I can't imagine when I was at school going along with a thing like that where you would clearly need to be totally ignorant and in defiance of fact in order to join in. And the fact you've got thousands of children joining into this stuff without any notable opposition from children that have bothered to do the work on it. I mean, there are some. I've seen some evidence of small amounts of opposition, but the fact such nonsense comes out does suggest there is some success in their attempt to massage, manipulate children in order to make them inherently stupid.
Well, of course, that is part of this plan, and we've covered the social engineering aspect of this in many shows, but it carries on here. Mayor Andy Burnham, this Greater Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham, this is a quote from him. He says, "It is right that children learn about all kinds of relationships and the equality of every relationship. This supports LGBT young people, teachers and parents, and helps to build strong, cohesive and united communities," the stupid robot programmed idiot said. Oh, it says Mr. Burnham said here. But I mean, why do they come out with these pathetic sound bites? Strong, united and cohesive communities. Well, this is straight out of a UN document, isn't it? I mean, basically, they spout these sound bites. They've lost their own minds. I mean, they could have been brought up with this agenda. It's absolutely clear when you look at the level of the propaganda that's coming out of the mouths of these useful idiots that they have no knowledge of what they're actually talking about, because when you go into the deep psychological reasons for this and think about it deeply, then it's clearly obvious what the agenda is, to me anyway. I mean,
Obama came here during, various campaigns, but he came here at the end of his term, and funnily enough, had a big meeting where he was promoting this stuff. Now, to my mind, I mean, look, Andy Burnham, you see, is an excellent guy when he's talking about social policies, investment in infrastructure, defending jobs and so on. Excellent guy. Now, I don't know what he thinks personally about all this stuff, but of course it's a kind of diversion, whether you're for or against what LGBT
yes,
says.
But the point is this, that why can't he grow a backbone and say what he actually thinks then, if that's the case? Because if he actually thinks that, then there's something wrong with him, right?
Well, I don't know what he thinks. But
you just said that's what he says. He thinks it's all about inclusiveness and being vibrant and cohesive and all the rest of the crap that these idiots come out with. So moving swiftly.
Whereas in Birmingham, of course, it was led to the opposite because, thousands of parents took the children out of school. Across a number of religions.
It's the useful idiots who talk on their behalf that are the problem. Let's get on to this. Anti-fake news activists persuade cancer charity to remove adverts on... Wait a minute, if we wait...
Anti-fake news.
Yes, anti-fake news activists persuade a cancer charity to remove advert. Now, this was something to do with, that these adverts, these pop-up adverts that websites use to actually generate some income.
Oh, yeah.
This was the Canary, which is basically an online left-leaning Corbyn-supporting blog, okay? Nothing radical there to see, move on, not much happening. In my opinion, they're okay. They supported your brother a lot.
Oh, they have good information.
Yeah, they have some very good information on there. But generally, they're a sort of left-leaning blog. That's what they are. But it says here, Rachel Riley is among those who convinced Macmillan Cancer Support to cancel promotion placed on the website. Now, this is the totalitarian, absolute extreme left in action. This is what they do. This is what they're trying to do, to shut us down, to shut anybody down who's outside the narrow corridor of accepted pathetic opinion, right? It says here, this is down. Yeah, this is.
But by extreme left, you mean corporate left? You don't mean
yes, I mean the fake far left, as we call them, because
the Clintonites.
Yes, because they use the term extreme far right. I think we need to want to counter it to balance it. You see, I mean, you have to have a synthesis.
I think our listeners have become confused.
Yes,
I think call them unaccountable agents of world corporate.
Yeah, I wouldn't say our listeners are confused, because if people who listen to the show would know what I mean by extreme far left. I mean, calling them the extreme far left is actually very useful, and everyone should do it, because then it takes away their ammunition of calling everyone far right, doesn't it?
It does. It does, except the SWP would object, because they're more far left for real. Yeah, but real, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, they don't like Windows on the World anyway. Anyway, this is down to a lobbying group called Stop Funding Fake News, right? So those who propagate fake news are now attacking it, right? They're now attacking those who actually fight fake news. So this lobbying group called Stop Funding Fake News, I would recommend anybody listening to the show, go and send them anything you can find that is real fake news. Anything in the Daily Mail, the BBC, the Telegraph, or any other newspaper. Send it in to these people and ask them why they're not doing anything to stop funding fake news, because all of these newspapers use these adverts. So why not bring them all down and bring these people to account? Because these extreme ideologists who actually are taking away free speech need to have a bit of their own medicine. It says here, like, basically, as their header, this stop funding fake news, have a quote by guess whom? Barack Obama. It says, change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change that we seek. Now, anyone quoting that after his warmongering and disastrous innings must be a danger to themselves and others, surely. But the Stasi Operation website header on this Stop Funding Fake News says, fake news. Right, it says, has injected a toxic cocktail of lies, conspiracy theories and hate, the H word, into our politics. This stokes fear, racism, religious intolerance and misogyny. It has even swung elections, and there is evidence that it causes mental illness, especially among young people. Well, they'd know all about that, wouldn't they? There's a lot to get through there, and it's the usual twisted and toxic fact-free rhetoric that all these state change agent subversives carry on about. Identitarian outrages, by those who wish to take away our rights on the back of their prejudice against critical thought in favour of their uninformed and fact-free opinions. So basically, it says, fake news has injected a toxic cocktails of lies, conspiracy theories and hate into our politics. It's the usual and the usual, isn't it, really? So which fake news are they talking about? Well, it sounds like they're having a go at hope, not hate, but sadly they are after those who can still think. So this is what they've done. They've got the Canary basically having their advertising taken away, and Macmillan Cancer.
Well, the Canary helps people think. That's their point.
Well, the Macmillan Cancer Foundation or Macmillan Cancer charity need to actually grow a spine if they've got one as well. But the sort of rhetoric, it causes national or rational thinkers to actually become momentarily paralysed by its barefaced lying, because it's basically just reversal, this, isn't it? It's a bit like being gobsmacked after listening to a sociopath blatantly lying and getting away with it. But the fake news industry, it says here, this is from this Stop Funding Fake News. They say the fake news industry is largely funded by online advertising. This is often paid for by big brands that have no idea where their money is going. They just pay a middleman who places the ads. So these self-appointed thought police are there to police the internet for them, enforcing their totalitarian agenda on everyone. This advantages websites, they say, that prioritises sensational clickbait, stories that play fast and loose with the truth in order to generate the most traffic. What, like the Daily Mail, Guardian or another? All of this is damaging our democracy and society, they say. Together we must and can do something about this. Yes, we must. The future does depend on this, everyone out there, so email them at stopfundingfakenews.com and tell them about all the fake news you can before it's too late. I would recommend inundating them with it, as there is so much about. Now, we've got a few minutes left, but I mean, I didn't manage to get through a lot of the stuff I had there, which is this week's fake news, but really, what we're talking about here is this kind of level of not only change agents, but change agent organizations. Basically, when people talk about Soros, they keep it kind of very simple. Oh, Soros does this, Soros does, but it's much worse than that, because the Soros type organizations such as this are everywhere, and they're funded and funded and funded, and they get loads of money to do it. So in actual fact, when you look at what's being put into the media, there is nothing of any truth or importance being let out there, which is why they're attacking sites and basically shows like ours. So please subscribe to us on Spreaker. It's really important that. And if you can, donate to Windows on the World. It helps us to get around. You can go to the website and do that. Please have a look at the bigger picture, the talks we do. Go through the archive, because we've got so many shows which are really informative. And the actual back catalogue that we've got there, exposes in great depth a lot of this stuff that we talk about. And when we go to these events, people who we meet talk about this stuff, and it's very, very encouraging that people actually know about what we're doing, and so that's having a contribution as well. So in conclusion, have you anything to add to that?
Indeed. Well, I would say, presumably you're about to say as well, go to the Windows on the World donation button to back Windows on the World, and I will just give you a little post thought on climate matters right now and the weather. You've probably noticed in the media there's now an even bigger 24/7 propaganda machine backing the man-made climate change, because they need to brainwash people and keep them in order. But specifically, of course, the climate change narrative is failing. And they want to hide this.
It's failing every day in The Guardian, actually.
It is.
Every single day,
look,
there's a fake news story about climate change.
There is. An actual bit of fact is the Jakobshavn Glacier, the biggest glacier in Greenland, is now growing and has been growing for some time, completely contrary to the warmist theory.
You'll be telling me next that polar bears can swim.
Well, I think polar bears can swim, and there's an overpopulation of polar bears. So I would urge people to, well, take up the struggle against the lies of climate change, and of course come on our website, weatheraction.com, where right now you can buy the April forecast, of course, or the May forecast and more. We predicted that early April would be cold, which is turning out to be true. And we've just issued the whole summer forecast for Britain and Ireland, and soon for Europe and the USA. And you can go and get these at half price today. So go there and do that, weatheraction.com. And Mark, there was one other thing we did not talk about, namely the clock changing, which has happened today, this morning.
Indeed it has.
And I want to register my regular point that clock changing now is completely anachronistic in the modern 24/7, 365 world, and should be ended. I think it's continued as a form of social control. It upsets people's rhythms and the rhythms of children and animals, pets, I mean. And there are some places now, which quite a lot of places in the world actually, which don't do clock changing. And in America, the state of Arizona doesn't do clock changing, which is entirely sensible. And I think it should be ended completely worldwide. However, having said that, don't let me divert you from the main task in the next 2 weeks, which is to make Brexit happen.
Indeed. And just to finish off the propaganda on tonight's show, Martin put this in chat, and it's from the BBC fake news website. It says, the unlikely similarities between the far right and IS, which is ISIS, of course, and Islamic State. It says, far-right extremists in Britain have been accessing terrorism material published online by the Islamic State group. Counter-terrorism experts have told the BBC. Well, I suppose that anybody wanting to look at it could find it there, but then we have to be very careful these days, because anyone even accessing the New Zealand shooting video could face up to 14 years in prison, yet it's still available online. And it's available on a website online. You can find it. But the point is that it says here, I think this is what Martin was referring to. Since the middle of last year, MI5, the security service, has been tasked with helping the police tackle the growing threat from British far-right extremists. Counter-terrorism officers have been using a range of methods, including phone taps, to gather intelligence on what the most violent individuals have been planning or aspiring to do. In some cases, arrests have been made after suspects have been caught downloading child pornography. Well, what has that got to do with what they're talking about here? So inadvertently they found a lot of paedophiles.
They should deal with them anyway.
Well, Sarge, we think they're looking at Islamic State website, Sarge, and it turns out they're not. Well, in actual fact, what it appears is that when you look at all this, there seems to be more police officers downloading child pornography than any other part of the population. Read the newspapers and take a look at that. It says here, but officials say that neo-Nazis and other extremists have also been accessing material to plan attacks published by their ideological enemies, Islamic State. So wait a minute. So now you're going to get Tommy Robinson supporters planning an attack on IS in a Wetherspoons near you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that's how ridiculous the whole thing is. That's about it from me and Piers tonight. But yeah, have a look at that. It's a BBC comedy article on their fake news website. The unlikely similarities between the far right and IS. Yeah, they're very unlikely, and there's no similarities. So have a look at that. We'll see you soon on Windows on the World. Thank you, everybody, and good night from me and him.
You